the fourth and final class for our Improve and Protect Your Memory series. Jenny Lubb from the Family and Consumer Sciences Education Ohio Extension Program is here. And I think everyone knows all of her wonderful credentials from all of the other programs that we've had. So we're going to cover exercise. And you don't need your workout clothes. You just, she's going to go over some really important information about how exercise can help protect and improve your memory. Okay, so let's turn it over to Jenny, and we'll learn all about how exercise can help protect and improve your memory. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Sue. So this is class 4 of 4, and we will talk about exercise and how that can exercise not just for our physical body, but also mental exercise, as we've kind of been talking about all throughout this program. And we'll also talk about conditions that can impact memory and how exercise can help us prevent and sometimes manage those conditions. So we'll kind of actually do the reverse. We'll start with a quick review of what we've talked about so far. Then I'll go over some of those conditions that impact memory, and then we'll wrap up by talking about exercise. So for review, way back in our first session when we talked about how memory works, we talked about crystallized and fluid intelligence, crystallized being what accumulates over time with our wisdom and judgment and vocabulary and so forth, whereas fluid is your ability to think and make decisions on the spot. And remember that crystallized tends to remain pretty stable over time, whereas it's fluid, your speed of recall, that tends to decline. And then we have our types of memory, the sensory, short-term, and long-term. Long-term is what can last forever. And that's what we recall when we think about recalling information. We talked about the different types of learning styles and how the information your memory is only as good as what information you take in the first place. So your learning style can impact your memory, and we'll come back to that specifically today. And then we talked about memory strategies, specifically concentration, concentrating on information, giving it your attention and effort, association, using links and cues to be able to remember certain types of information, repetition, and then relaxation to facilitate memory. And we'll come back to that also today as we talk about how stress can impact memory. So I will start with the same question I've started with every week. Has anyone tried any new memory strategies or mental exercises throughout the course of this program? Wordle, okay. That seems to be the popular thing for this group. It's fun, yeah. Well, the second week we talked about how nutrition can impact memory and how important it is to fuel our mind, to fuel our brain. And we did that week also talk about some physical conditions linked to nutrition that can impact memory, specifically our heart disease, clogged arteries, and high blood pressure, because we need blood to flow to our brain. If we're not getting blood and nutrients and oxygen to our brain, that can certainly impact our memory. So heart disease is one physical condition that can impact memory, as can dehydration. It's important to have the water in our bodies as well to carry those nutrients to our brain. And then last week, we talked a little bit about substances like caffeine, nicotine, and alcohol. It's kind of a bridge between the nutrition and the medication. There are certain substances that can impact memory. And nicotine is one to definitely avoid. The others, caffeine and alcohol and even over-the-counter medications, there's not necessarily need to avoid those, but you do want to be aware of the side effects they can have and how they could potentially impact your memory. And definitely talk to a doctor or healthcare provider if you feel like you are experiencing side effects from any medication, whether it be prescription or over the counter, rather than suffering in silence. So the takeaway from last week was to keep an updated list of medications that you can share with your healthcare provider, keep track of any side effects that you may be experiencing, and share those. Take your medications as prescribed to avoid potential side effects. And of course, don't share those with others because they are prescribed specifically for you based on your body. So all of this kind of comes together as today we talk more about some conditions that may impact memory. There are many conditions that can impact your memory, and they may be physical or emotional. Some are treatable. Some are preventable. It's easier to prevent in many cases than to treat. And we've already talked about some, for example, the physical conditions of high blood pressure or heart disease and how that can, prohibit the flow of blood and oxygen to the brain. But there are others. So we'll go through a few here and know that many of these, not all, but many can be prevented with exercise and physical activity. The first couple, not so much. These come back to learning style. So in the first lesson, we talked about our learning styles, and I asked for a raise of hands for people to identify which learning style they thought they had primarily. And most of the people in the room during that class said they were visual learners, which doesn't surprise me. About 2/3 of us are visual learners. It is the most common learning style. So given that, if we have diminished visual ability or a loss of vision, that could absolutely impact the memory of a visual learner. So a lot of those changes, nearsightedness, farsightedness, can be corrected with prescription eyewear. So seeing your eye doctor regularly, wearing correct eyewear, if you have a change in vision, can help improve the information you're taking in and thereby help with your memory. And seeing your eye doctor regularly can also help them identify and treat potential conditions they may identify, like cataracts and glaucoma or even macular degeneration. Hearing loss is, similar. About 30% of us are auditory learners. And so if you're an auditory learner, hearing loss could have an impact on your memory. Again, if you're not taking in the information in the first place, you won't be able to recall it later. And hearing loss can have many causes. They come about in different ways. Something even as simple as, inserting a cotton swab too far into your ear could cause damage. Sometimes it's more gradual, loud noises can lead to hearing loss. But whatever the cause, again, many times they can be treated or corrected. If you see a healthcare provider, they may be able to, clear a blockage or do some sort of corrective procedure to help with hearing, or maybe prescribe hearing aids. So if you are an auditory learner, certainly wearing hearing aids can help improve your memory. But anyone who may be dealing with hearing loss and is prescribed a hearing aid could help with that. Another condition that's fairly common but treatable is hyper or hypothyroidism. So the thyroid is a gland that's located in your throat, and it produces a hormone that helps regulate your body's metabolism. So if your thyroid is overactive, meaning it produces too much hormone, That would be hyperthyroidism. It's kind of akin to being over caffeinated, where you may be overexcited, overstimulated, have trouble focusing. So that could impact your memory. Hypothyroidism is when that hormone or that gland is underactive. And it's more akin to, the types of the medications that may cause the drowsiness or sedative effect. So if your thyroid is underactive, it can be harder to concentrate and impact your memory in that way. But either way, there's testing available to check for your thyroid function. It's a fairly common test, blood test. I actually take a medication each morning for my thyroid, and that's the treatment. So it's just a daily medication to help regulate your thyroid function. So it's something that's fairly easy to correct. It's just a matter of knowing that it needs corrected. Lack of sleep is another one. We've talked about this previously and how important rest is for your overall health, but particularly for your memory consolidation. So you may have heard sleep begets sleep, and getting a good night's rest can help give your body time to consolidate memories from the day. So if you have any type of sleep disorder, that's definitely something to talk with a healthcare provider about, because lack of sleep, we all know how it feels when you don't get a good night's sleep. You're more groggy, it's harder to concentrate. And that's certainly a challenge in and of itself. And then when our memory is not being consolidated regularly, that on top of it can impact our memory. Another condition, this one is more emotional than physical, but loneliness. So we've talked about interacting with other people as one of those mental activities. Interaction with other people helps to keep our minds sharp, and conversation particularly requires us to think about what is being said and how to respond. It may require us to draw on our memory, and it will often lead to new memories. So having that social interaction may be something that we take for granted, but it definitely stimulates our minds. And this term, environmental press, is a theory that basically states that we'll rise to meet the challenges of the environment. So when we're with other people, we're learning from other people. Everyone knows something or has some experience that we don't know or we haven't had. So we challenge ourselves by being around other people and often function at a higher level than we do on our own. So if you're able to have that social interaction, that is a mental activity in situations where social interaction isn't possible or easy. Finding other ways to challenge your brain is that much more important. Doing things like taking a course or learning a new skill or doing those those puzzles and so forth. Stress is another condition that can impact our memory, and it has many causes, and it manifests different ways. We feel stress differently. How do you feel stress? How do you know when you are stressed? How does your body let you know when you're feeling stress? Something's going on. Yeah, you might feel your heart rate pick up or start to sweat, sweaty palms. Headache, yeah, so headaches, stomach aches. Our bodies have ways of letting us know when we're under stress. It manifests differently for different people. And a little bit of stress is not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes stress can motivate us to get something done. It's really the chronic ongoing stress that we're talking about here, with that continual release of the hormones, the cortisol, can actually impact our brain chemistry and make it harder to focus and harder to recall information. So when we're under chronic stress, it can impact our memory, make it harder to focus and concentrate. And it can also contribute when it's untreated or when we don't have good coping mechanisms, it can sometimes lead to more serious conditions like heart disease or digestive conditions or sleep issues and so forth. So finding healthy ways to cope with stress is really important. It can, yeah, so that hormone cortisol, yeah, that's released under stress, it can, because our bodies are diverting energy to certain processes, like when the stress response is activated, our energy is diverted to addressing the stressor in our life, and other things may be, off kilter a little bit. So yes, your weight control could become more difficult, appetite may change, and over time, that's why we have an increased risk of chronic conditions like heart disease and diabetes and so forth. So grief is another one, and grief is emotional response. It's an emotional response to loss, which is a very powerful emotion, and it's not something to necessarily try to treat or just get over. But we bring it up here because people handle grief differently, and the grieving process may take longer for some than others. And when someone is going through the grieving process, it can cause concentration difficulties, and it can make it more difficult to focus and inhibit as a result, and inhibit someone from learning new things, can also make it harder to recall information. So, grief is a normal process, but it's very powerful. So it's good to just be aware of that and know that if you are having trouble keeping up with day-to-day activities, it may be time to seek help there. But it is worth knowing that it can impact your memory, as can depression. Depression's very similar in that it is a physical and an emotional illness. When someone is experiencing depression or diagnosed with depression as a mental health condition, it can cause both physical and emotional symptoms. So, you have the emotions of sadness and so forth, but for some it can, it can cause aches and pains, or even, lack of interest in activities, and make it hard for someone to keep up with daily activities. So if you or a loved one is in that situation, then that's when it's recommended that you seek help, because depression can typically be treated once it's identified, but it often does go undiagnosed, and it has many causes as well. Sometimes it can be a side effect of a medication. So something to definitely bring up with the healthcare provider if you or a loved one is having trouble keeping up with daily activities for whatever reason, grief, depression, so forth. There's just a couple more here. Delirium is one. So delirium is often confused with dementia, but it's not the same. Delirium is shorter term, and it's usually largely, sometimes completely reversible. And it does affect up to a third of older adults at some point or another. It's defined as a condition that's characterized by altering or fluctuating level of consciousness. It too can be a side effect of medication or sometimes medical illness. Oftentimes a specific cause cannot be identified. It's a shorter term thing that's typically reversible. Sometimes it may be onset by a big life change. So for example, moving out of one's home into a assisted living facility could trigger delirium, for example. So it is obviously the disturbed consciousness could cause gaps, problems with memory. And we contrast that to dementia. So delirium and dementia are often confused, but while delirium is typically reversible, dementia is not. Dementia is a gradual, it onsets gradually and it progresses over the years, and it's generally irreversible. So doing what we can to prevent dementia through mental and physical activity, through fueling our brain and our body with good nutrition, is really key here. The prevention is key versus the, whatever we can do to prevent dementia versus treat it is going to be more impactful. There are some different types of dementia that fall under the umbrella term. Alzheimer's is the most common. So Alzheimer's accounts for anywhere from 50 to 75% of dementia cases. And then vascular is the second most common. It accounts for 20 to 30%. Then there are a couple of less common types. But with all of the types, people typically experience changes in their mood, their personality, and their behavior. It is an individual experience. So while there are some common symptoms of dementia, everyone's experience is unique. And while there currently is no cure, there are lots of ways in which people can be helped and supported. So seeking medical advice and getting a diagnosis is an important first step, so that support can be provided through all the stages of the journey through the disease. So when to seek help. So if you or a loved one is diagnosed for dementia, or if you suspect that, that it may be dementia, you would want to seek medical help when your memory problems begin to interfere with your ability to live alone or to care for yourself. Some key indicators that your memory loss may be significant or problematic is if you are getting lost in familiar surroundings, forgetting where you have been, forgetting how to get to a familiar place, not recognizing familiar people, repeating the same question over and over again. Those are not normal memory lapses. Those are more significant types of memory loss. The example I gave at the start of this program, the first class, was, there's a big difference between forgetting where you put your keys and forgetting how to use your keys. So we often forget where we put things. It's a common, aspect of life. That's a pretty normal type of memory lapse. Forgetting how to use your keys or forgetting how to get somewhere familiar is much more significant. That would be cause for seeking out help. And while it is, while dementia is permanent, it does progress over time. Many memory problems are treatable and even sometimes reversible through medication or through like an MRI or a CT scan, sometimes a personality test. If a specific impairment can be identified, sometimes it can be treated. So there are some options to help support people living with dementia, help treat dementia. However, as I said, preventing memory loss through a healthy lifestyle is much more impactful, which is, I'm sure, what drew all of you to this program. And we've talked about some of those healthy lifestyle behaviors already. these are all, choices you can make. So data from some large research studies have shown a significant lower risk among those who practice these behaviors listed: physical activity, choosing not to smoke, light to moderate alcohol consumption, a high quality diet, and cognitive activities. So in one particular study from the National Institutes of Health, the people who scored the highest in these 5 behaviors had a 60% lower risk of dementia than those who had only 2 to 3 of these behaviors. We're practicing only 2 or 3 of these 5 behaviors. All of the behaviors are modifiable. So in this sense, you have some control over the future health of your brain. You can choose whether or not to be physically active. You can choose whether or not to do mentally stimulating activities. You can choose whether or not to smoke, to drink alcohol, and of course, which foods to eat to fuel your brain. So exercising your body is important for many, many reasons. Physical health, mental health, and brain health specifically. Exercise can also help us with strength, balance, and flexibility so we can live independently longer. And physical activity is more than just exercise. So if you are starting a new exercise program, it's a good practice to consult with a health provider before starting something new, especially if it's going to be rigorous, if you're doing new movements, and especially if you have some joint issues or mobility concerns. You don't want to exacerbate any existing conditions. But physical activity is more than just exercise. So it includes all the activity we do on a day-to-day basis. It doesn't have to be formal. It doesn't have to be planned. There are many ways to be active that are free or low cost and don't require special equipment. So things like walking, doing household chores, gardening, raking the leaves, choosing to take the stairs. Those are all, ways to be physically active. And then the recommendation for exercise, which is planned and structured activity, is to try to get at least 150 minutes a week. So that can be, it's commonly broken down and recommended to aim for 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. But you can break it down however you need to or however you want. You can do 5 or 10-minute intervals, and it all adds up. Any activity is better than none. And there are lots of great resources online. The notes here say check out a video from the library, which is still a great option. You can also find lots of great resources online now if you want to, have someone kind of coach you through something like walking from home or doing some strength training at home. Oftentimes you don't even need equipment. It can just be simple movement from the comfort of your own home. And one example is Go for Life from the National Institutes of Health. So if you're looking for some resources to get started being more physically active, Go for Life is a campaign from the National Institute on Aging, specifically to encourage physical activity amongst older adults. So if you have access to the internet, you could download guides to help get started with an exercise routine. Some of the topics are listed here. And you could also contact them if you want a free print copy. They will sometimes send a publication or maybe even a DVD to your home if you request it. Can't guarantee that. I don't know what kind of resources they have in stock, but that is something historically they have been willing to do in the past. So that's physical activity. There's also exercising our mind, which we've talked about all throughout this 4-class series. This includes things like trying new learning styles. So someone last week mentioned doing some activities with their non-dominant hand, just to kind of be more intentional and make yourself think about what you're doing, the movement you're doing. Trying to vary your activities. So, maybe you really love crossword puzzles or word searches, but if that's starting to feel easier or more routine, mixing it up, trying a Sudoku, trying something else, just to mix things up a little bit. We talked about having conversations, interacting with other people, and just trying to use those different memory strategies, using those links and cues and association and repetition when there's specific pieces of information that you are really trying to commit to your memory. Any other, mental exercise activities that come to mind as I'm talking about these, something that you might want to try? Yeah.
We have a question from the online audience. They ask, regarding puzzles, are mathematical and word puzzles both beneficial? Are these two examples of working different areas of the brain?
Yeah, so math puzzles, word puzzles, those are both mentally stimulating. And I would say, if you enjoy one more than the other and get really comfortable with it, maybe mixing it up every so often just to do something different. But part of that is just how each of us is wired. Some of us like numbers more than words or vice versa. So, but either one is a great choice. Learning a new language. Yeah, that's, there are some new skills or things we can try that are really easy and some that are more complex. So learning a new language or learning to play an instrument, those are definitely great challenges to embark upon. So this is kind of your challenge. It has been throughout the full series, in addition to eating nutritious foods, staying physically active, choosing not to smoke and to limit alcohol consumption, exercising your mind is kind of the takeaway. So all 5 of those things, as we saw, can improve our memory, and they're all important. But this is the one we maybe don't always think about or talk about as much. So what I challenge you to do as a result of this series is to find ways to exercise your mind and make that part of your routine, your daily or weekly routine. There are a couple of, fun mind games at the end of this presentation too. So one of them is this little poem, and I can read it out loud. And the question is to think about how many are going to St. Ives. So as I was going to St. Ives, I crossed the path of 7 wives. 7 wives had 7 sacks. 7 sacks had 7 cats. 7 cats had 7 kittens. Kittens, cats, sacks, wives. How many were going to St. Ives? Does anyone think they know the answer? 1, yeah, it is 1. So yeah, so that first line is as I was going. So it is just 1. There's a couple others. So there are 2 different lists here. And the challenge is to figure out what determined the order of these lists. Either one. Do we have any thoughts? It is, yeah. So the first one is the number of letters. It starts with Ohio, which is 4, and then Idaho 5. So each one in the list has 1 more letter than the last. Yeah, the other one's a little trickier. Do we have any thoughts or guesses? We figured it out, yeah. So in this second list, the last letter of each state is the first letter of the next. Yep, that is it. So that wraps us up. Well, I appreciate you all participating in this program. I will hang around if there are more questions, but I hope it's been valuable. This was the first time we ever taught it, and I would say it was pretty successful. So thanks for being part of that experience with me.